Okay, I just have to continue here on my screen and we're set to go. Okay, well, Happy New Year, everybody. It's time to have fun. And I like the idea of doing something really positive to get this new year rolling. And so I have a project that is in fact kind of part art and part kind of a craft approach. It's a project. And so I have had tremendous fun getting my examples together. So I hope that you get as engaged and have as much fun as I did. And at any point, Jennifer will be on monitoring questions. So if you have any questions, I'll be happy to try to answer them for you. If you need suggestions or if you need something to be repeated or whatever, feel free to ask those questions. So we'll get started and maybe we can switch to the upper camera and you can kind of see this is what we're going to, type of thing we're going to make. So I thought, we'll celebrate the new year by actually making something for the new year. And what I did, I went to my local Michael's store and I picked up some blank letters. These are ones that are made out of masonite. And so I got the numbers that would be 2021. Later on, I'll show you some other type of numbers that I picked up as well. And they come in all sorts of sizes. But these you can kind of see by my hand, you can kind of get an idea about how big they are. So anyhow, and they start off as being, this kind of masonite plain color. And then what I did was laminate some paper. I just glued some paper on it and trim the paper down so that they would conform to that nice kind of crisp look. We'll talk a little bit about some alternatives to buying these and making your own. But then I decided that I was going to divide in order to kind of celebrate the new year, or what I hope is going to be a much more positive year coming up. I divided them into the 4 seasons. So the number 2 is winter. The 0 here is spring, and then this is summer, and then this is fall. And what I tried to do is come up with different scenes and different feelings for, what I like about winter and what do I like about spring and whatnot. And then in addition to the numbers, I also found these discs that are wooden, and I also glued some paper on that because I kind of like the idea of having a few other little kind of auxiliary pieces that kind of make it a little more interesting. And then these actually stand up. I kind of set them horizontally here so that you could see what we're after. I want to just talk a little bit about them before I get them out of the way and we actually get started with the whole process. But with this one, I used black paper as a ground. So instead of using white paper to glue onto my number here, I glued some black paper and then kind of used that as a dramatic way to make the snow pop out and whatnot. And then, have a full moon kind of hanging up there and try to get a feeling for kind of snow and the atmosphere around the moon, kind of nice highlights to bring out the front of the snowman, a little bit in the tree, and then all the snow in the background. Because that's, to me, I wanted to kind of create a scene that just makes me feel like, oh yeah, that's really fun about winter. Now with the spring, I always think about the flowers, just the spring flowers, tulips especially. I love tulips. And so when those were available, so I wanted to kind of celebrate the bright green of new leaves and all the bright collections of flowers, the iris, daffodils, tulips, and whatnot. And then for the summer, I wanted to kind of create a feeling for being by maybe a stream or a pond underneath the shade of a larger tree. And that the tree especially, I wanted to kind of get that sense of it being really tall up there, but also kind of providing a little bit of a shade. And then in between the two, this actually, my little duck there is kind of attached to this one. Obviously the moon's attached to that one. And so this kind of a span between the spring and the summer. Couldn't quite figure out where to put that particular friend. So I decided to kind of put it so that it could be overlapping. And then fall, Halloween, bright fall leaves, crisp nights, and all that type of thing. So I thought I'd focus a little bit more on the Halloween. So I've got like a pumpkin down here. And I was thinking about, the yellow glow from the pumpkin could kind of give a little bit of mystery and a little bit of drama to the rest of the scene. So the leaves up above, they're a little bit darker at the top, but you can see that there's some nice yellow highlights that might be an influence of this kind of magical glowing pumpkin. And there's a little owl that's kind of in the hole of the tree there. And there's a little house in the background, some stars, and a really crisp. I also, think about fall as having really crisp nights. And then I decided to have a Halloween cat on the disc. And what I liked is that when I bought this style of number, very crisp, and I love the curve up here at the 1. And so I thought, well, if I put this here, then it'll look like almost like it started here and rolled down that slope and ended right on the edge of it. A little bit more, it would kind of fall down or something. So I was thinking about them individually and thematically, but then at the same time, I was kind of aware of trying to get the whole thing to fit together. Now, what I'm going to do, and this may not show up great on the overhead camera, but this was made to stand up. And in order to make these stand up, I used these blocks, and they're also little wood findings that I got from the wood area of Michael's. And so it stands up. And you can kind of see the way that works out from overhead. So I just took these blocks and I used glue, and I actually have spring clamps, and I got them to stand up after I had glued the paper on the surfaces. And I've kind of colored them in black so that they kind of disappear in the background, but you can kind of see them the way that they, at least from the upper view, the way that they stand together, and kind of keep in your mind what they look like when they're kind of laying down flat. All right, so we're going to move those out of the way, and then we'll get started in kind of the way that I approached it. So I mentioned these are some of the type of letters that are numbers. They also have letters. You don't necessarily have to just do 2001. You could spell your name out, or your friends or your mom's or your children's name, something like that, and present it. There's also this style. They come in different sizes. This is one that we'll be working on kind of close to the end. But these are all different sizes. You can decide how big you want to work, what kind of style of the font or the style of the letters. But then the other thing that you could do too is you could take foam board. This is like, standard thickness, it's almost a 1/4 inch foam board. And maybe if you have, print out some of your own numbers on computer paper, the font and the size that you want, use that as a guide to kind of trace it out, and then just cut these out and then laminate these with the paper. Now, the paper that I'm using, I seem to have lost. Here we go. Let me get this sheet. This is a paper that, you want something a little bit heavier, because I like using watercolor. The Pitt pens that I'm going to demonstrate with work really nicely on a sized paper. So you want to get, some kind of a substantial weight of paper. When I kind of flick it, this one is actually at 250 grams per square meter. So it's a good weight paper. And so it's made to be able to take a lot of work with either watercolor, Pitt pens, drawing pencils, whatever it is that you have at hand. And today what I'm going to be demonstrating is using some artist pens and some watercolor primarily. So that's a good paper to use. And so then this is like an example of laminating them on like the wooden discs. Now you could maybe take some gesso or something, and you could gesso these, sand them out, and then you'd have a ground similar that you would to a painting. You could work on that. But I kind of found that if I take the paper, cut the shape out, and put it on top of it when it's glued, you know, you can use these little clips. I have another one, and that'll keep it clamped down nicely. Then, you know, if you do something you don't like, if it doesn't work out, then, you know, it's a little bit easier maybe to even just glue another piece of paper right on top of it, or you can kind of work it out and kind of peel it off. But it makes it, I think, a little bit less messy involved than having to worry about priming it or gessoing or something like that. And if you really feel like it, you know, you could go ahead and have the shapes and work on those and then glue them on once you have decided that you have something that you really like. Okay, so now these, especially the ones that already come really nice and white, the one disadvantage to that is that this surface isn't really great for, I mean, if you're doing an acrylic paint application or something like that, this could work, but most of the materials, like especially watercolor, will kind of pool up and it'd be very easy to smudge it, and it's not going to be quite as permanent. So these definitely I would try to kind of laminate with some paper. Now I have another one that I have worked on. I got so excited about doing the one, and I thought one of the things I have about the zoom, sometimes if I'm doing something detailed, it doesn't show up that well because it's kind of small. So I did a much larger one. I found this, in fact, I probably will have to kind of show it to you off to horizontally, but this is another one that I did, and this is a huge 0. So, you know, another big 2, 0. So this is going to show up. But what I ended up doing is, again, this would be for spring, and, you know, again, the tulips and all the wildflowers. I found a nice photograph of tulip fields or you know, spring flower fields in Holland. And so I kind of took little bits and pieces and kind of constructed my own landscape from it. And then once I had that done, I didn't want to kind of do it for the whole thing. And, you know, the photograph had some trees and stuff, and I didn't think that was going to work that well. And so that, you know, kind of brings up the whole notion of the composition. So, you know, we could also bring one of the smaller ones back where, you know, obviously I'm not going to be able to do something that is huge or so, you know, it necessitates having to see the whole object. So I kind of thought with the one, well, with tree, you could kind of get the trunk, and then there's enough stuff up and through here we could get the idea for leaves. And then down here, instead of having a fat pumpkin, I had to have a more vertical size pumpkin and put that in there so that, you know, not only are we kind of thinking about the whole sequence of the 2 and the 0 and the 2 and the 1, but, you know, this is like your format. This is like a shaped canvas. And so how are you going to put your information on that to work with that as a unit? So, you know, a little bit more complex is this one, where I decided that I really like the idea of having, well, maybe I can rotate that and get most of it in. Maybe if I kind of put it slightly at an angle here. Okay, so I like the idea of having just this almost infinite, disappears on the horizon line field of flowers. I mean, that just, to me, it must be so awesome to be able to see in real life. But then once I had that done, you know, I wanted to use it in the lower part of this so that I could really fill it full of as much information as I can over something that's spatial. So if I had, like, you know, one object, like, you know, this cat or something like that, then I could pretty much put it anywhere. But for the type of thing I wanted to accomplish about my notion of flowers in spring, it required more of kind of a landscape vista. And by putting it down at the bottom like this, I had the most area in order to do that. So even though there's a breakup in here, you still can carry that across and your eye will see that as a consistent horizon line. Now, once I did that, then it was to move up, and I didn't want this to be entirely sky here. So then I thought, well, birds. I like birds too. I love songbirds. I've got lots of memories of when I was growing up of robins and cardinals and blue jays and all that. So I thought, well, I'll do vignettes of birds. So I started doing individual birds, and then I had that effect and decided to surround it with yellow because I thought yellow would make that kind of pop out. So I thought this part of the zero will be birds. And then I was going to do the same thing over here. And then I thought, well, let's make the birds a little bit bigger. So then I could kind of play around with the detail a little bit more and group them together a little more tighter. So instead of having them spread out over the whole thing, you know, there are 5 birds here, the 3 birds here, and they kind of cluster together. And I had some of the, you know, when I used the source material that I found, because I know these birds around my neighborhood right now because it's winter here. But, you know, there are little cherry blossoms, and there's this whatever odd tree that is, and then just, you know, kind of a birch branch and stuff. So I got that cluster done, and I had thought about continuing up there, but then I thought, okay, what am I going to do with this? And then I thought it'd be interesting maybe to have a tulip here, and then instead of it, you know, kind of being the same direction and just do like a miniature tulip, what would happen if I did the flower? And, you know, I tried to find some source materials, some photographs that had a tulip that was opened up, and then have that like it's coming down from down below. And originally I thought about having the stem kind of wind around. And then I got the idea of, no, what would happen if we had a leaf here and a leaf here? And so that way, compositionally, I have this down here. It goes back into space. And then I've got my little bird vignettes here. Then I've introduced a tulip here that's a larger scale. And so the only thing I feel I have left to do, I like the idea now of doing a sky up here with white puffy clouds, and then let it kind of come down here. So at this point now, let's get kind of started with this. And for this, I'm going to use watercolor. And so I'll bring, you know, my paints out here. And just kind of arrange things a bit so that it's a little more manageable for everything. I've got so many supplies here because I never know when I get started doing this stuff. I really never know exactly what I'm going to do. Oh, just as a point of reference, I used Faber-Castell's artist pens, Pitt pens. They're brush point. We'll get into that. I'm going to demonstrate using with these. There, maybe that'll show up a little bit better there. Okay. They're just really intense colors. They're like an indie ink formulation, but with colored pigments. They're permanent. They're archival. They don't smell. They're non-toxic. And once they dry, they're permanent. But before they dry, you can kind of play with them a little bit. So that's how I did all the flowers down here and the birds. The background here is the watercolor. You know, they have a really nice set of watercolors that I'll be using as well. And so now I kind of sketched in, you know, some clouds and whatnot. And so I'm going to use that as a basis for finishing the sky up there. And so usually the blue is much richer and darker at the top, and then it kind of fades out. So I have it set up that you can see that the yellow kind of fades out here as well. So in through here, there may be just a little bit of kind of an interesting greenish hazy tone to it, but I want the top of it to be kind of this really nice sky blue. Coincidentally, I'm doing a sky with sky blue. So I've charged my brush up with water, and so I'm going to kind of let it flow. Now, what I have a tendency to do is I'd like to kind of press down and use the heel of the brush to kind of help move things around. And I try not to be too fussy with it. And I'm not really concerned that it's totally uneven at this point. Also, rather than using a detailed brush or a smaller brush, I'm using a larger brush. I even have a couple other even larger brushes that I might decide to use. But if you have a larger area to cover with watercolor, then you usually want to use a larger brush. Now, this is that paper that I had mentioned, the Stonehenge paper, and there are other papers similar to it. out there, but the Stonehenge paper has a lot of sizing in it. And what's important about sizing, the sizing is what protects the fibers of the paper from immediately absorbing any material that you're using. So in this case, watercolor especially is very important to try to get a paper that has sizing. So I can still move that around. If I had paper that had very little sizing, the fibers of the paper would just suck that pigment right in, and I would have no opportunity to move it around or to change it. Because if I put a little bit of water in through here, if I decide that's too dark, I can just put plain water and you can see the way I can lift that right up. So I can make it a little bit lighter. So if I want to kind of imply, oh, there may be some clouds back in there, instead of it just being a total solid blue with no other clouds around there, I can do that. I can also take a rag or take some kind of a paper towel or something. And if I really want to kind of pull some of that off, I can actually daub it, and you can see how much lighter that really gets at that point. All right, so I'm going to take another blue and kind of make it a little bit richer in through here. So it's going to be a combination of that one blue and this blue. Okay, so I also like these little tools. You move them around and it'll kind of model the surface a little bit. It's not necessarily going to be consistent. And I kind of like that, because a lot of times these kind of skies, you know, have little traces of ambient things in the air. Okay. I'm going to maybe blot this again with the sizing. It's kind of, it takes a while for that pigment to soak into the fibers of the paper. So it gives me a chance to kind of play with it and get, you know, kind of a consistent coloration, get the concentration and the color that I'd like. And again, you know, if I kind of go over some area that I don't want to, I've got a chance of at least minimizing it and being able to cover it. Now, I like the idea of this kind of really nice, intense blue running right along the edge of that really bright green part of the leaf. That'll kind of help get that to kind of pop out. All right, so maybe just a little more intense up here. Again, I'm kind of, instead of always using the tip of the brush, sometimes, you know, I kind of use it a little flatter so I can drag the pigment over a larger area. Okay, yeah, that's the kind of blue I'm thinking about right there. All right, so what I'm doing now is just kind of blocking in the background. Let's get that so it's about there. So that's a combination of the two blues. There we go. Okay, so that's as intense as it's going to get. And now, and it's also kind of nice to have a scrap piece of paper that you can use in order to test things out. And I'm looking, sorry, I'm looking for it fell on the floor here. Okay. So I can test it out and I can see, all right, that's still a little too intense. All right, so that's a little bit more like what I want. Okay, so I'm gonna bring this, I'm gonna kind of move it around, get it to blend with that a little bit. So now I can get the watery pigmented mixture. And you can kind of see how now I was able to move it around. So I got a nice blend from kind of that dark blue to a lighter blue. So I'll come back and maybe mix it up a bit more. And I want it to really start getting light as it comes down, partially because that leaf is also getting lighter over there. And I still want to have enough of a contrast, you know, since the green has elements of blue in it. I don't want it to suddenly kind of flatten out. I want that leaf to really kind of stand out. And then again, kind of come back here and get the strength of the watercolor I want, kind of move it around. And now when I'm coming down over and through here, well, let's go up here first, get this done. I'm kind of not blending it all the way to the yellow quite yet, because now I want to just get water on my brush and take advantage of that sizing. I still have a chance to kind of work with it. And so now essentially what I'm doing is just using the water to kind of help dissolve some of that blue. And I'm trying to get a really nice soft transition from up here to down there. And again, water on my brush. And the watercolors, these Faber-Castell watercolors, I believe they're 48 colors. So you have a nice range of color, but they're very, very intense. Yeah, they really have a nice coloration, so that even when you do water them down, you know, you still have a nice pigment, even though it's a very transparent. Okay, so that's starting to look pretty good. We'll get a little more blue. Now I'm going to come back up in here and start kind of working with little holes in the cloud. And again, on my scrap piece, instead of going directly from my pan onto the paper, I'm using a piece of scrap paper here to start getting, you know, kind of the color dilution that I want. And so I'm going to kind of come in through here, put a couple little holes in there. Okay. And then, you know, at some point, you know, I may not finish the whole thing off because I want to get to the next thing. But I think that, you know, if we develop it enough that you can kind of see the way it's going to look like when it's finished, then, you know, let's take some water with the blue and come back over on this side and start getting kind of this together, little tiny clouds out there. And the way that kind of clouds work, if you look at clouds that are really far away, you're going to see less of the bottom of them. And so they're going to look fatter or flatter on the bottom. The ones that are closer to you, you actually start seeing more of the underneath side of the cloud and less of the top. And so, you know, these way in the background, I'm going to show less of the bottom. And then the ones that are a little closer to you, maybe more above you, then more of that cloud shape is going to be kind of shadowed because you're looking at the bottom of the cloud. Now, sometimes it's kind of enjoyable to go outside with your materials on a nice bright summer day with these white puffy clouds up in the sky and just do clouds. You know, the good value studies, you know, with all the shadows, and you know, you got basically what look like white balls of cotton up there. And then you can develop the form by then working with the different gray values that are within them, which we'll get to here in a second. Okay. All right. So at least, you know, you're starting to kind of get an idea of how that's going to look in combination with everything else. So it's almost like, you know, here's the field, the ground, the sky's up here, and then you've kind of interrupted it with a little bit of graphic illustration work. All right, so rather than, you know, try to finish this off, because, you know, you can imagine that I'll let that dry a little bit, put a new layer on, start working on some nuance and whatnot. But what I will do is kind of come back and I'm going to take a little bit of black, kind of mix it a little bit with some blue, because I want a slightly different blue. And again, I want to add, let me get just a little more black in there, but I want to keep this really, really diluted, because I want to start putting in some of the shadows of the clouds. And, you know, those are very subtle in areas, like very, very light gray. Okay, so let's kind of this. You know, I don't want this kind of bluish gray to get confused with the sky. And, you know, at some point I might have to kind of come back and intensify the sky a little bit. But I'm thinking about maybe the light coming in from this direction. So the top of the clouds in through here, except for maybe where there's a little bit of, I'm going to kind of think of it, the light coming in through here. So the front of the cloud will have a tendency to be more kind of in the shadow. And you can see that, as you add some of these little grays and these shadows, how that starts to build up a volume. And then, in this area here, I could come back and maybe touch that up a little bit with a darker blue. So then, you get more of a definition between the cloud and the sky and whatnot. Okay, so if that is sufficient, unless anybody has any questions about how we'd finish it, if you'll let it, I would, normally kind of work out the basic shadows, then let it dry, see what it looks like, and then go back and start adding a little more intensity in some places in the sky, and then come back and kind of start putting in some darker shadows in the cloud, especially kind of underneath the clouds. I want them to be substantially darker, and that would be just a matter of kind of going from light and then starting to work to get to the darker shadows. So anyhow, but I think that this, to me, I'm really pleased with the way it kind of worked out with all those compositional units, and the way that I was able to use watercolor for up and through here, use the Pitt pens down here, and kind of combine them. You could also, if I wanted to, you could use some of the polychromos or the Albrecht Durer Faber Castell pencils that could also add some little extra, especially the Albrecht Durer watercolor pencils. You can add those in places that you might want a little intensity, hit them with a brush, and then you can get the same color as the watercolor and make that a little more graphic. Okay, so we will move our 0 out and then come back to a plain 0 without anything on it, and we'll get started with that. And with this, I'm going to use a combination of watercolor and Pitt pens. So this is one of the Pitt pens. It is, this is the way that I usually do a lot of my illustration, and it's a fixed point. It has a nice, consistent wicked point on it. It's black Indy ink, and what I usually do is kind of draw my characters if I'm doing illustration with the black ink. You let it dry. It may take a little bit of time for it to really set, and then go back with it with either more Pitt pens with brush type or with watercolor. So I didn't have anything really in mind for the zeros, but then I started thinking about last year. We're just leaving the year of the pig, so I thought, well, let's go ahead and kind of just comment that we're in a new year, but remember, up until Chinese New Year, we're still in the year of the pig, so kind of a multi thing. So what I'll do is just, I don't have anything particularly in mind, but maybe kind of draw some pigs on the advent of a new year. Maybe he could be having a banner or something that is celebrating the advent of a year coming up. If you're nervous about drawing, you could start with a pencil and then ink it up. You don't necessarily have to use a dark line. You could just watercolor. It's kind of up to you to decide how you want to approach this. All right. So let's give him a nice pair of pants. Okay, come on there. Okay, he looks pretty happy. All right, let's have another one. Let's see. This one. Let's have him leaping. Okay, I have another one. Let's see. Let's have one facing this way.
And remember, if anyone has any questions, feel free to ask them in the chat and I can relay them to Franz.
Yeah, somebody ask a question. Otherwise, I'm gonna get lost in pigland here, and I'm gonna totally forget what I'm doing, except for having
You're doing
fun.
amazing, Franz.
Okay, I'll have him doing a jig, a little dance. I like that, a pig jig. Maybe he should be under the influence a little bit. He's had a little liquid libation here, so puts it in a dancing mood. All right, so we'll start with that. Okay, so that's this particular pen. All right, then I will go to another one. Now there's I have to find it. Oh, okay, well, we'll, rather than take time for me to try to get organized here, we'll go through with what we got. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I will find a suitable pig color in one of my brush pens. And let's start off with this one. Again, you know, if you want to, you can test the color out. That looks like kind of the quintessential pig color. So what I'm going to do now is, like, you can see that it's maybe hold it a little bit closer. There it is. Okay, that should show it. It's like a brush. It has a taper and then kind of comes to a thicker thing. And these are really juicy. And so that what you can do is when I'm drawing a line, I can start off nice and thin. If I put a little more pressure, and as I kind of go around the bend there, you can see where it's very dynamic. It goes from thin to thick to thin again. And they are transparent, so that, you know, going on top of that blue watercolor has changed. You know, again, I don't know how much you can actually see. Yeah, right. So I love using these as my first round of color. Okay, so we'll start with that. I normally kind of give these things a little bit longer to dry because I really want the ink to be absolutely dry, so that as I use these, that they don't start picking up the black pigment, but they seem to have dried pretty well. Okay, so we've got that. And then I'm going to take another brush marker. Again, I always like to kind of check to make sure. Okay, so this is a lot lighter, but what I can do is kind of come over, and again, with the sizing of the paper, it's the same thing with these artist pens. I can kind of work the surface a little bit, and you can see the way I can get them to blend together a bit. And I want to kind of avoid doing too much work near the black line. And if you do pick something up, you can either kind of scratch it off onto a pad or your finger or something. Okay, so what I like doing is kind of, again, I'm kind of thinking the light is coming from this direction. So on the top of the pig, I've got a lighter value. And then let's find one more. What would be a suitable pig color here? Let's go to this one. This is kind of, all right. So I'm going to put just a little bit of a couple little kind of shadow or a little more extra modeling there. So I've got a light, I've got a medium for most of it, and then I've got some darker color here to kind of help give it a little bit of volume. Come on, like that. Okay, and then I can take either my light or the other one, and if I kind of start working on those edges a little bit, then it softens them so that they aren't quite as hard edge. Now, there are some places where I do like to keep that hard edge, but okay. Let's get a kind of a nice dark blue here. There are 60 of these brush colors. And then there is several of the black. Oh, realized I was remiss in giving him 4 legs. Okay, just have a little there. Okay. Now, I want to do one more pig here. Let's do him, but instead of him being kind of a more normal pig color, let's make him green. My daughter was, I don't know, she couldn't have been more than about 2 years old. And I was doing a lot of screen printing. And I was going to make her a sweatshirt that had an elephant chasing a monkey. And so she was in my studio and, you know, kind of watching me do it. And so I mixed up, you know, really nice elephant gray. And she said she didn't want a gray elephant. She wanted a red elephant. And so being very, you know, frugal, I thought, oh, I don't want to waste this gray. But then I thought, well, yeah, why not make an elephant red? And so we did. And it was so much better than what I had planned. So ever since then, I consider alternative colors for my characters. Okay, so you can see how nice these brush pens work. I mean, they're just so nice, very vibrant. And the other thing that with a lot of the watercolor, the Faber-Castell pencils, all that, they use the same pigments in all their materials. So if I'm using, this is like a number 170 May green with the Pitt pen, if I would take a same 170 color pencil, it'd be the same pigment. So if you're doing multimedia approaches, then you don't have to worry about the colors not going together. All right, so once we get that done, let's give him orange striped pants. All right, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to follow that curve. Instead of like, if you have like a round object or a round type surface, if you draw your stripes like this, you know, you got stripes, but that has a tendency to kind of flatten that, and that looks more like a flat circle. You know, by the same token, you know, have a similar thing like that. If I take this and I do a curved line, and then I do another curved line, and then this one is maybe a little bit straighter, and then this one curves around, and that one curves around there, you can see the way that that's starting to look more like a sphere rather than a flat circle. And the other thing that you can do as well, again with these Pitt pens, there are different brushes on them, and I will get the brush, the black brush. And so instead of using this one, which is the nice small thin line, if I take this and start up here and it's thin, and then I make it a little bit thicker and then let it get thin again, you can kind of see the way that that also, instead of having like, you know, the same width of line, if it goes from thin to thick as it curves around, then goes thin again, that gives you a sense of it being a little bit more volumetric. And then on top of that, let's take a gray here and maybe a brighter orange. And then if I really want to kind of increase the sense of this being more of a volume, if I come back here where it kind of is near the bottom part of the curve, you know, the part that's getting most of the light is from, you know, kind of the top on to about here. And then once you get to the halfway point, then it gets less light. So your color will be a little bit darker. So if I go like that and then come back with a light gray, because not only is the color stripe going to be a little bit darker, the white is going to be that way too. And I can even get that to maybe even go on top of that a bit. You can see there's quite a difference. You know, let me hold it up a little bit closer to the camera. I keep on forgetting that I can see it, but you know, if it's all right. It's really weird trying to get this. Okay, well, anyhow, I don't know if that really shows it because the color is a little bit dull, but I think you get the idea that it's really going to kind of give you a much more spherical, volumetric looking shape rather than just having straight lines and the same consistent width. So when it comes to giving our porker here lines on his pants, I want to kind of go with the shape. I mean, it's the same thing if you think about wearing a nice plaid shirt. If you look at the fabric a shirt's been made from, it's going to be nice, you know, kind of geometric, right angle. But then as soon as you put it on your arm, those straight lines are going to conform to way it fits on your arm, so that, you know, any stripe that's coming this way will, you know, stay, you know, fairly straight. But the ones that are coming around here, instead of looking like a nice grid pattern, you're going to follow the contour of the shape that it's covering. So if I want to kind of give this pig a little more, let's see if I can hold it up again. So there we go. Okay, so you kind of see the way that I'm trying to show, you know, his belly, kind of the shape of his leg and whatnot. And then I'll do what I had mentioned before, down in maybe right at the top of his waistband on down to here. That's going to be a little bit darker. So it's going to give it more of a volumetric look. Okay, and then same thing, I'm going to use a light gray and kind of come down at the bottom, and I'm going to kind of give a sense of where some of these shadows are. Give them a little wrinkle on through here. All right. So real quick, now what I want to do is then, yeah, you can imagine that I could just draw pigs all over the place, doing all sorts of piggy things. Okay, I might put just a little more in there. I could take you know, just a little bit of my pink color and kind of give him a different, make it a little bit more warm it up a little bit. Okay, I forgot to do one of those trotters. Let me do that real quick, and then we'll get to the next step here. Okay, do the scarf later. So I'm gonna get my watercolors out again. And so this is a little bit, this is something that I kind of noticed when I looked at, like, you know, 1930s Disney color shorts, not the really long movies or anything, but the, you know, Mickey Mouse cartoons. Well, actually in Snow White and some of those movies too, it's the same thing. But you have a very graphic character like Mickey Mouse, similar to these pigs, has a real strong line, very flat color, a little bit flatter than this. But if you look at the background, they're just gorgeous. They're these watercolors, and they're very soft, and they're very few actual outlines. So what I found, it's kind of an interesting thing to do, that, you know, I can put in, you know, kind of some nice transparent kind of fluid, some shadows here. And then this one, it may be a little bit leaping up in the air. So, you know, now the quality of this is much more, you know, atmospheric. It's painterly, it's softer. And so if I were to make that pig pop out literally, this kind of helps do it, because there's a big contrast between, you know, this very soft watercolor as opposed to the more intense coloration and especially the graphic outline for my character. So, you know, if I decide, okay, let's have some bushes or something in here. So if I start off with, you know, putting some bushes in here, if I do them with watercolor and don't outline them, they're softer and they stay in the background. So it really kind of gives it, it's almost like stage setting to make that pig stand out in the foreground. And so as I complete my whole number here, you know, I could just build all these little vignettes up with, you know, different types of pigs and then start tying them together with trees or shrubbery or something like that. Yeah, you know, even use that as, you know, kind of part of the background for this pig. And then when that dries a little bit, then I can come back and maybe put in, you know, just maybe some shadows, a little darker. Again, but just keep it very kind of fluid. And then, you know, if I decide, well, maybe up until here, we can have some sky as well. Maybe have a start working on a sky up here. Kind of plan for some clouds. Might get a little bit lighter as it comes down, a little darker at the top. Yeah, so I want the color to be a little softer, a little less graphic, so that my main character stands out. Yeah, it's just at this point, maybe I'll test that a little bit. Don't get too dark. I've also found that, you know, I just kind of start getting involved with creating this environment, and all of a sudden I'm in there and I start thinking, well, you know, it's a nice day and there's a couple little puffy clouds. Okay, now it's still wet. If I go back into it with some, you can see the way it kind of spreads out, gives it kind of a nice little texture. I'll keep it darker at the top and let it kind of soften as it comes down. And then let's get that scarf in. Let's give it, how about a nice purple. I don't know what made me think about it. It's actually more like kind of a lilac. Okay, we'll do it kind of some. Okay, let that dry just a tiny bit, and then I'm going to come through and put, you know, just a little bit of a sense for shadow. I can get an even darker kind of purple, and then put it kind of at the bottom of the stripes. Maybe there. That. Now, if I want a little bit of dot of color, actually, let's do that with the Pitt pens. Say that I've got some red flowers, and here, I can just put some, make them stand out in the foreground a little bit because they're going to be a little bit brighter, but they don't have any outlines on them. But I'm going to kind of make up that shape. I can put them together, and then come back and let's use one of our Pitt pens. So we've got some foliage here that kind of matches his skin color. what I find that is so much fun about doing this type of thing is that you get to create your own characters, your own world, whether it's like, with something that was a little bit more realistic, like my birds and flowers of the first pieces. You can have some fun with imaginary landscapes. Okay, so again, maybe if I hold it up and see a little more detail what it looks like. Is that helping or hurting? Anyhow, the land of pigs starting to celebrate on my 0. So whether you do smaller letters, numbers, bigger ones, you can do them more realistically. You can do them, kind of illustration style. Let's see what we got here. To review again, just we got all sorts of different looks here. And then of course we got the bigger one that I have yet to finish up with the sky up there. But these obviously are a little bit more realistic looking. These are more character. But at any rate, the idea is, to kind of come up with some kind of a theme. You could do a little bit of everything, but we can assemble these quickly for one last look at the potential of a happy year. Oh, here's the one.
Franz, we have one question.
Yes.
Have you ever used the Pitt pens to watercolor?
Yes. In fact, I will show you how nice that is. I don't know how much. Okay, so if I can find, I've got a bigger pad of paper here. All right, I was kind of playing around with ducks earlier. But what I can do is, like, again, this paper has a lot of sizing in it. If you use a paper that isn't sized, or if you get a paper, this is like a 100% rag content paper, so it's really good for absorbing things, but it has a good amount of sizing in it. So if I want to, I could kind of like put a line in like that, and then if I don't let that sit there too long, I can come back there with a brush, and you can, I don't know if this is too subtle to show up, but I can get some color off of that. So if I do, let's say, let's do another one of my pigs here real fast. See if I can, it's kind of like beat the clock. Okay, so I can, once I've drawn the lines in, then if I hit it with the brush, within a reasonable amount of time, you can see that I can then get a wash type effect. And then if I want to, I can come back, and if there are areas that I want to kind of re-emphasize. Once these brush pens, that once the ink sets in the paper and have had a certain amount of time to set up, they're going to be permanent, but there is a working period where you can get them to respond like watercolor. Now, I at this scale, they work pretty well, but if I were doing a larger piece, I'd definitely be using watercolor rather than this, but I mean, I found that this is, even with the black, if I'm working with, so many things laid out here. Oh, here we go. All right, again, if I've got a, now with the brush pens, they're a little juicier than the fixed point, the real sharp one. But I can kind of work the line. I can work to get some value there. And what's nice about this, I think, is that the value, the gray tone is related to the black, you know. So if the black is kind of a nice warm black, this is going to be a warmer gray. So you know that there's going to be something that's kind of compatible with it. And then, you know, you can do things like, you know, if you want to blend, I can put a lot here and then let it kind of taper out a little bit. And I can take another one, go on top of it a little bit and make it like that. And obviously, like watercolor, you want to make sure that you keep the water you're using, you know, as clean as you can. But I can get a nice blend with that.
It's beautiful. Thank you, Franz. And I just wanted to quickly remind everyone that the class was recorded and it will be available on michaels.com/online classes. So you can rewatch it and relearn some of the tips that Franz gave us. And, you know, thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining.
Okay, if no other questions, Happy New Year to everybody. I'm glad that we could spend some time together here, and I hope you enjoy your artistic new year. Bye-bye.